Hashtag paraphrased narrative. General Ellsworth's story: a single telephone call to the Pentagon would be enough to end their careers and prove that injustice cannot hide forever. It should have been just another routine drive through a quiet corner of Louisiana, the sort of place most travelers simply pass through en route to their real destinations. General Naomi Ellsworth had taken drives like this countless times before. No security escort, no emergency lights, just herself, a rented vehicle, and an appointment to keep. She had a classified meeting arranged at Barksdale Air Force Base, and she couldn't afford any delays. But somewhere between Lake Charles and Shreveport, just past a small town named Mosswood, Naomi noticed her secure phone losing signal strength. She needed to make a call, not later, not in 30 minutes, immediately. She spotted an aging, nearly forgotten gas station, Kelly's Fuel and Food, and turned into the weathered, uneven parking area. It wasn't attractive, but it would suffice. Naomi positioned her car near the building's edge, away from the entrance where several locals had gathered, resting against pickup trucks, exchanging stories in the humid heat. She gave it no second thought. To her, it was simply a spot to find a quiet moment. She retrieved her secure device, stepped outside for clearer reception, and lifted the phone to her ear. General Ellsworth, confirming identity, beginning briefing, she stated, her tone quiet and businesslike. The Pentagon official on the line began the briefing right away, discussing classified movements and immediate orders. Information that only a select few had authorization to access. Naomi kept her eyes alert, casually observing the area as her training had taught her, while remaining concentrated on the conversation. Several people near the fuel pump began to look her way. She didn't resemble the people who typically stopped in this area, and certainly not someone in command without a badge or uniform visible. She dressed in denim, simple sneakers, a loose olive-colored jacket, and a baseball cap pulled down over her short hair. Regular clothing, nothing that announced four-star general, and that was precisely her intention. But not everyone interpreted it the same way. Inside the station, a woman named Paula Sweeney observed from behind the register. Mid-50s, tight blonde hair pulled back, permanent worry lines from a lifetime spent criticizing others. Paula didn't recognize a highly decorated military hero. She didn't even see a woman conducting a phone call. She saw what she chose to see. Problems. Paula lifted the old desk phone and contacted the Mosswood Police Department. She lowered her voice so other customers wouldn't overhear. "Yeah, we've got a suspicious woman out here near the pumps," Paula reported. "Really questionable. Could be using drugs or something. Acting weird. You better come take a look." She ended the call before they could ask more questions. Across town, 2 officers received the call over their radio and rolled their eyes. Not much ever occurred in Mosswood. They didn't object to creating some excitement if it relieved the monotony. They put on their sunglasses, climbed into their patrol car, and raced toward the station. Meanwhile, Naomi stayed beside her vehicle, attempting to maintain complete focus on the conversation. The Pentagon was communicating vital information that couldn't be disrupted, but she had no knowledge that trouble, serious trouble, was already heading her way. But just as Naomi prepared for her next instructions, she spotted flashing lights bouncing off the station windows, and everything around her began to change. The patrol car screeched into the area, gravel flying from beneath the wheels. Naomi lowered her phone briefly, squinting at the flashing red and blue lights. 2 officers leaped out before the vehicle had completely stopped. The taller officer, Randall Cooper, mid-30s, crew cut, broad chest, unclipped his holster with a swift motion. The other, Sean Delaney, slimmer, younger, and overeager, copied his actions. Both moved like men seeking confrontation. Naomi felt the atmosphere tighten around her. She calmly set the secure phone on her car's hood and kept her hands visible, palms open. Her voice remained steady, controlled, exactly as they had trained her at West Point decades earlier. "Good afternoon, officers. How may I assist you?" she inquired. Cooper shouted back, "License and registration now." Naomi took a careful half-step forward, reaching slowly for her wallet in her back pocket. "Certainly. My identification is right here. I'm active duty military. General Naomi Ellsworth. I'm conducting official business." Delaney laughed mockingly. "General, right? You think we'll buy that?" Naomi retrieved her military identification and federal travel documents, extending them toward the officers with steady hands. Cooper grabbed them roughly, barely examining the papers, before shaking his head. "This is counterfeit," he declared, throwing her ID onto the hood like garbage. Naomi blinked, shocked for the first time. "Sir, I guarantee you—" "Shut up," Delaney interrupted. "You think you can fool us? Lady, you chose the wrong town for that game." A small group was starting to gather. Customers, station employees, drivers who had stopped for gas and decided to stay for the entertainment. Some whispered, some chuckled. Nobody intervened. Naomi's training urged her to calm the situation, but every instinct also warned her that these men weren't seeking explanations. They had already determined who she was, and worse, what she wasn't. "Officer," Naomi attempted again, her voice low and steady, "please contact your supervisor. You're making a grave error." But Cooper already held handcuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Naomi remained still. She held her position, not in rebellion, but because something inside her snapped, something profound. "I am a general in the United States Army," she stated, her voice now sharp. "You are unlawfully arresting me." Cooper laughed, actually laughed, loud enough for the observers to hear it echo off the pumps. "Right, and I'm the commander-in-chief. Now turn around." Before Naomi could speak another word, Delaney seized her arm harshly. Cooper forced her other wrist behind her back. The handcuffs clicked tight enough to pinch her skin. Naomi clenched her teeth, suppressing the wave of shame that surged hot and quick. Somewhere behind her, the secure phone, still connected to the Pentagon, fell to the pavement. The voice on the other end, hearing the commotion, began shouting her name. But the officers didn't notice, or perhaps they didn't care. Cooper pushed Naomi against her rental car's side hard enough to shake the door. Gasps rose from the small crowd. "Got her," Delaney announced, as if they'd captured a trophy. Naomi, breathing heavily, stared directly ahead at the greasy window of Kelly's Fuel and Food, her reflection broken into fragments by the dirt and grime. In that instant, she wasn't a general. She wasn't even a person to them. She was just someone to be manhandled, because they could. But inside the Pentagon, alerts were already sounding, and Naomi's absence wouldn't remain unnoticed for long. Back at the Pentagon, the secure call had shifted from unusual to concerning in less than 60 seconds. Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hanley, seated behind a bank of monitors in Washington, D.C., stared at the blinking line marked, "Gen Ellsworth, secure." The audio feed was chaotic. Background sounds, struggling noises, voices yelling words he couldn't distinguish. Then only static. Bryce leaned toward the microphone. "General Ellsworth, this is Command Operations. Do you copy? General Ellsworth, please respond." No reply. He looked up at his supervisor, Colonel Dana Sharp, who was already walking across the floor. "Track her location," Sharp commanded. Her voice sliced cleanly through the operations center's hum. "Immediately." Within moments, a technician displayed a blinking point on a map. It was nowhere near the base. She was stopped at a gas station just off Highway 171 in Mosswood. A tiny spot on the map that most Pentagon personnel had never heard of. Sharp bent over Bryce's shoulder, jaw clenched. "Get Barksdale Security on the line and connect me to JAG. If something's happened to Naomi, we're responding right away." Meanwhile, back in Mosswood, Naomi sat on the curb in handcuffs, her back against the station wall. "What's your actual name?" Delaney demanded, hovering over her like a nightmare. "Who are you working for?" Naomi breathed slowly through her nose. "You have my identification, my travel orders. Everything you require is right there." Cooper snorted. "Lady, you're about 2 seconds from being arrested for obstruction. Don't test it." Naomi said nothing. She wouldn't give them the pleasure of seeing her beg. From the corner of her eye, she noticed people taking out their phones, recording, murmuring. Meanwhile, the manager, Paula, stood by the entrance with her arms folded, grinning like she was watching a neighborhood fight. The entire situation was spiraling out of control, and nobody seemed willing to stop it. Suddenly, Delaney's radio came alive. "Dispatch to Unit 3. Confirm you have detained subject." Cooper grabbed the radio from his belt. "Affirmative. Female, early 40s, refusing cooperation." Another pause, then, "Be advised, subject is flagged federal. Repeat, flagged federal. Pentagon has initiated emergency contact. Release immediately and await further instructions." The color left Cooper's face. Delaney lost his arrogant expression. "What the hell?" he muttered. Naomi, still sitting there, said nothing. She simply looked up at them, waiting. Cooper struggled with his keys, removing the handcuffs without meeting her gaze. He mumbled something that sounded halfway between "sorry" and "ma'am," but lacked the courage to say it clearly. Naomi rose slowly, flexing her wrists where the metal had pressed into her skin. The crowd was completely silent now. Even Paula's smile had disappeared. Naomi picked up her phone from the ground. The screen was shattered. Connection severed. Sensitive information potentially compromised. She looked at both officers directly in the eyes. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today." Cooper opened his mouth as if he might argue, but new flashing lights illuminated the parking lot. This time, it wasn't local police. It was a convoy of black SUVs from Barksdale Air Force Base, tires screaming against the asphalt. But Naomi wasn't waiting for reinforcements. She was already preparing herself for what needed to happen next. The doors of the black SUVs opened almost simultaneously, like something from a film, but there was nothing glamorous about how the officers from Barksdale moved. It was pure urgency. No smiles, no pleasantries, just brief commands and tense expressions. Leading the team was Lieutenant Colonel Darren Mosley, mid-40s, keen-eyed, and not there to make friends. He crossed the lot in long steps, a folder under one arm, his attention immediately focusing on Naomi. "General Ellsworth, are you hurt?" Mosley asked, his voice carrying across the lot. Naomi shook her head once. "No, Colonel, minor scratches." The greater damage was to their careers. Cooper and Delaney shifted uncomfortably, realizing far too late just how deep they were in. The other Air Force security officers quickly formed a protective circle around Naomi, positioning themselves between her and the Mosswood police without being instructed. Mosley turned to the local officers, stone-faced. "You are hereby ordered to stand down pending federal investigation. Any additional action on your part could be interpreted as obstruction of justice." Cooper stammered, "Well, we didn't know who she was." "That's not an excuse," Mosley interrupted. "You had documentation in your possession. You had everything you needed." Delaney still tried to act tough. She was behaving suspiciously. Mosley stared at him for a long moment and said quietly, "You saw a black woman on a phone call and made a choice. That's going to haunt you for the rest of your life." The Air Force team efficiently escorted Naomi into one of the SUVs, ensuring she was comfortably seated inside. As the convoy departed, Naomi glanced back once, just long enough to see Cooper wiping his forehead with a shaking hand and Paula hurrying inside the station like a bug under a kitchen light. Inside the vehicle, Naomi didn't say much. She gazed out the window at the endless stretch of highway, her thoughts racing faster than the SUV. Colonel Mosley broke the silence after a while. "Pentagon's coordinating a complete investigation, ma'am. Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Division, it's going public whether Mosswood wants it or not." Naomi didn't nod. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. "They should have known better," she said simply. Mosley nodded in agreement. "They're going to discover what it feels like to be seen for who they truly are." The convoy continued past fields of tall grass and leaning telephone poles toward the Air Force Base where Naomi's authority and dignity would finally be acknowledged again. But Naomi knew the real fight was just starting, and this time the entire nation would be watching. News of the incident reached national headlines before Naomi even completed her debriefing at Barksdale. Someone had uploaded the cell phone footage online. Raw, grainy video showing two Mosswood cops handcuffing a woman who calmly explained she was a U.S. Army general. No yelling, no struggling. Just the unmistakable sight of someone being stripped of dignity by people too blinded by arrogance to recognize it. It spread like wildfire. By morning, Mosswood wasn't just a dot on the Louisiana map anymore. It was the epicenter of growing national fury. Networks broadcast the story repeatedly. Commentators shook their heads in discussion. Civil rights leaders called it a clear example of racial profiling and authority abuse. Even veterans organizations, usually careful not to wade into political waters, issued statements demanding justice for General Ellsworth. Back in Mosswood, the police department scrambled for damage control. Chief Vernon Grady, a man more accustomed to hunting deer than handling press conferences, stood before a sea of cameras, sweat forming under his cowboy hat. "We regret the misunderstanding," he stammered, avoiding eye contact with the reporters. "The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a complete review." A young reporter from Baton Rouge interrupted him mid-sentence. "Chief Grady, why were trained officers unable to recognize military credentials clearly presented to them? Was race a factor in this so-called misunderstanding?" Grady stumbled over his words, muttered something about high tensions and mistaken identity, but everyone watching knew. The department was trapped. They had no real defense. Meanwhile, Cooper and Delaney had gone completely silent. Their names leaked within hours, splashed across headlines, social media, and public outrage forums. Anonymous sources from inside the department revealed that both men had previous complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, neatly swept under the rug before. Not this time. Civil rights lawyers from New Orleans and Washington, D.C. filed official federal complaints on Naomi's behalf. The Department of Justice opened an independent investigation. Even the Louisiana governor weighed in, calling the incident an appalling miscarriage of justice against a national hero. It wasn't just about Naomi anymore. It was about every person who had been doubted, dismissed, degraded because of a uniform they didn't wear, a color they couldn't change, or an assumption they couldn't stop someone else from making. At Barksdale, Naomi was briefed constantly. Her lawyers, Pentagon officials, even White House liaisons, calling for updates. She answered every question with the same steady voice she had used to command troops in war zones. But when she was alone, in the quiet of her quarters, the weight of it pressed hard against her chest. Not because she was surprised, but because after all the medals, after all the service, after all the sacrifice, in a dusty parking lot in Mosswood, none of it had mattered. Still, she hadn't spent her life running from battles, and she sure as hell wasn't about to start now. But if Naomi was going to speak, she knew she had to do it on her terms. Not just for herself, but for every silent face watching her from the shadows. The press conference was scheduled for noon on a Saturday outside the gates of Barksdale Air Force Base. Cameras were already lined up in neat, frantic rows. Microphones stacked 2 and 3 deep. Reporters murmured into phones. The air was hot, thick, buzzing with a different kind of energy. The kind that meant something important was about to happen. Naomi Ellsworth stood behind the podium, wearing her full dress uniform for the first time in months. Medals gleamed against the deep blue fabric. Her shoulders were squared, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't there to entertain. She wasn't there to make anyone comfortable. Colonel Mosley stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching protectively. A few senior Pentagon officials flanked him, grim-faced. They had offered Naomi carefully worded talking points, diplomatic phrasing, a safe path through the minefield. She politely declined. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was clear enough to cut through every rumble of traffic, every click of camera shutters. "My name is General Naomi Ellsworth," she began. "I have spent 29 years serving this country, leading soldiers, advising presidents, defending the ideals written into the Constitution. Yesterday, in Mosswood, Louisiana, none of that mattered." She paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. "I was judged not by the content of my character, not by the uniform I've earned, but by the color of my skin and the assumptions made about me because of it. Reporters scribbled furiously, but Naomi wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking to the people who had seen the video, who had felt a familiar ache in their gut, a sharp memory of being doubted or demeaned or dismissed. "I'm not here today for an apology," she said. "I'm here because silence is not an option. Accountability matters, respect matters, human dignity matters, and none of these are negotiable based on someone's prejudice or someone's ignorance." Behind the cameras, members of the local community had gathered, black families, veterans, students holding handwritten signs. Naomi caught glimpses of their faces, some angry, some hopeful. All of them waiting for something they hadn't seen enough of lately: real leadership. "Injustice is not new," Naomi continued, "but change only happens when enough people refuse to look away." She finished with no dramatic flair, no rehearsed slogan, just the truth. "I was not humiliated yesterday. They were, and history will remember it that way." She stepped away from the microphone without waiting for questions. The applause started small, a few claps from the crowd, but quickly grew into something real, something alive. As she made her way back toward the base, Naomi didn't walk faster or slower. She moved with the same steady pace she always had, one step after another, carrying more than just her own story on her shoulders. Because she knew the world wouldn't change overnight. It might not even change in her lifetime, but maybe, just maybe, it would change a little because she refused to stay quiet. When you're treated unjustly, your voice is your strongest weapon. Speak the truth, even when your hands are trembling. Someone out there needs the strength you demonstrate. If you believe in standing up for dignity and accountability, share this story. Speak up when you witness wrong. Change begins with people willing to call it by its name.